Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The lobby has these beautiful, polished marble floors. After I mop them late at night, the overhead lights create perfect reflections. Last night, as I was finishing up, I looked down and saw the reflection was wrong. It showed the lobby as it must have looked in the 1930s, filled with men in hats and women in long dresses. I froze, staring, until one of the reflected women, a sad-looking lady in a feathered hat, looked up from the floor and met my eyes. She reached a hand toward the surface of the reflection, like it was the surface of a lake. I stumbled back, dropping my mop. The reflection vanished, but on the dry part of the floor where I had been standing, there was a single, small, wet handprint. My name's Caleb Whitfield, and 3 months ago I never thought I'd be telling anyone this story. Hell, 3 months ago I was fixing air conditioners in Little Rock, sweating through coveralls and pretending my life hadn't completely fallen apart. But when your girlfriend leaves you for your business partner and they clean out your bank account together, you end up taking whatever work you can find. That's how I landed in Hot Springs, answering a Craigslist ad for night maintenance at the Arlington Hotel. The posting was bare bones. Just night custodial position, reliable pay, must be comfortable working alone. No mention of the rules. No warning about what happens after 2 a.m. I grew up about 40 minutes south in Malvern, so I knew the Arlington's reputation. Every Arkansas kid hears the stories. The grand old hotel where mobsters used to gamble, where baseball players came for spring training, or Al Capone supposedly had a favorite room. My grandmother used to drive us past Bathhouse Row when I was little, pointing out the Arlington's red tile roof and telling us about the healing waters that drew folks from all over the country. What she never mentioned was why the hotel went through night staff so quickly. The day manager, Jessa Herndon, hired me on the spot. She was maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back tight, and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. During our interview in the oak-paneled office behind the front desk, she kept glancing at a manila folder thick with what looked like incident reports. "The pay's $15 an hour," she said, sliding a sheet of paper across the desk. "Plus benefits after 90 days. But Caleb, and this is important, there are specific protocols for the night shift. Things that keep everyone safe." I figured she meant, don't prop doors open, don't let strangers in, basic security stuff. Every building has its quirks, right? The Cherokee bathhouse down the street reportedly had issues with homeless folks breaking in, nothing I couldn't handle. That first week, working 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., everything seemed normal. I'd vacuum the lobby carpet, dust the antique furniture, mop those gorgeous marble floors that reflected everything like mirrors. The Arlington felt peaceful at night. Just the quiet hum of old radiators and distant traffic from Central Avenue. Then Jessa gave me the real orientation. It was my 8th night when Jessa pulled me aside after the day shift ended. The lobby was empty, except for a couple checking in late, their voices echoing off the high ceilings as the desk clerk handed them their key cards. She waited until they disappeared into the elevator before speaking. "Walk with me," she said, leading me toward the back corridors that connected to the older sections of the hotel. Her keychain jangled softly as we passed storage rooms and employee break areas I hadn't seen before. We stopped at a heavy wooden door marked "Staff Only" that looked original to the building. Inside was a small office with filing cabinets from the 1970s and a desk that belonged in the museum. She pulled out a leather portfolio and set it between us. "What I'm about to tell you stays between us," Jessa said, opening the folder. Inside were handwritten notes, typed memos from different decades, and what looked like police reports. The Arlington has certain requirements for night staff, things that aren't in the employee handbook. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, clearly photocopied many times. The header read, "Night Maintenance Protocols, Arlington Hotel," in faded typewriter font. "These aren't suggestions," she continued. "They're survival instructions. Follow them exactly, and you'll be fine. Ignore them." She gestured to a stack of incident reports. "Well, let's just say we've had turnover." I read the list, expecting standard security procedures. Instead, I found 8 rules that made my stomach twist. 1. Never work alone in the basement after 2:30 a.m. If you must retrieve supplies, do so before this time or wait until after 5 a.m. 2. If you hear piano music from the ballroom between midnight and 3 a.m., do not investigate. Continue your duties elsewhere until it stops. 3rd, roommate 24 is permanently out of order. Do not enter, even if guests complain about noises. Report any disturbances to management the next day. 4. When mopping the lobby floors, if the reflection shows anything other than the current room, stop immediately. Leave the area wet and return after 20 minutes. 5. The elevator will sometimes stop on floors that don't exist. If the doors open to reveal anything other than a hotel hallway, press the lobby button and do not exit. 6. Between 3 and 4 a.m., you may encounter guests in period clothing from the 1930s. Acknowledge them politely, but do not engage in conversation. They are not hostile if left undisturbed. 7. If the front desk phone rings more than 4 times in succession after 1 a.m., answer it, but do not speak first. Listen carefully and respond only with yes or no answers. 8. Should you see a woman in a feathered hat near the lobby mirrors, immediately retreat to the staff break room and wait there until sunrise. Do not attempt to communicate with her. I set the paper down and looked at Jessa. Is this some kind of initiation thing? Like hazing for new employees? Her expression didn't change. 3 weeks ago, our previous night custodian, Tommy Briggs, decided rule number 4 was nonsense. He'd worked here 6 months without incident, got cocky. She pulled out a photograph, security camera footage showing the lobby from above. This was taken at 2:47 a.m. The image showed a man I assumed was Tommy, mop in hand, standing in the center of the lobby. But something was wrong with the floor around him. It looked like water, but the surface rippled strangely, and dark shapes moved beneath it. "Tommy's in the reflection," Jessa said quietly. "Look closer." I squinted at the photo. Sure enough, there was a figure in the floor's surface. But it wasn't Tommy. It was someone else entirely. A man in an old-fashioned suit, reaching upward. "We found Tommy 20 minutes later," she continued. "Maintenance room, locked from the inside. Soaking wet, hair full of algae, rambling about drowning in 1937. He quit that morning and moved to Memphis. Won't take calls about what happened." The air in the small office suddenly felt thick and warm. I glanced at the door, calculating how quickly I could leave. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why not on my first day?" "Because most people quit after the first week anyway," Jessa said, closing the folder. "The work's boring, the pay's decent but not great, and not everyone can handle being alone in the building this old. But you've stuck around. You've already seen something, haven't you?" I thought about the reflection in the lobby floor, the woman in the feathered hat who'd looked up at me, the handprint that appeared on dry marble. "Maybe," I admitted. "That's Rule 8, she said, tapping the paper. "Mrs. Catherine Holloway. Lost her husband in the stock market crash. Checked into the Arlington in November 1932. 3 days later, they found her in the lobby at dawn, sitting in front of the mirrors. Heart failure, they said, but she was smiling like she'd seen something wonderful. Jessa stood up and handed me the list. Keep this with you. Study it. And Caleb, don't try to be a hero. These rules exist because people died figuring them out. She left me alone in the office with the folder, the photographs, and a growing certainty that $15 an hour wasn't nearly enough for what this job actually required. But I needed the money, and Hot Springs wasn't exactly overflowing with opportunities for someone with my particular combination of bad credit and worse references. I folded the rules and slipped them into my back pocket, trying not to think about Tommy Briggs and his algae-filled hair. 2 nights after Jess's orientation, I walked into my shift with the rules folded in my wallet and a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint. The evening desk clerk, Miranda, was training a new girl who couldn't have been older than 19. "This is Caleb," Miranda said as I signed in. "He handles nights. Caleb, meet Ashley. She's covering weekend day shifts." Ashley had that fresh-faced optimism that comes with never having worked in a place with actual history. She smiled and asked about the hotel's ghost stories, probably expecting the usual tourist-friendly tales about benevolent spirits and cold spots. "Just old building settling," I told her, grabbing my cleaning cart. "Nothing to worry about." Miranda shot me a grateful look. Smart policy. Keep the new hires innocent as long as possible. By 11:30, the lobby was empty, except for the night auditor, a quiet guy named Kevin, who spent most of his shift reading paperback novels behind the front desk. The Arlington's overnight clientele tended to be either business travelers who went to bed early, or the kind of people who didn't hang around the lobby after dark. I started with the bathrooms on the second floor, working my way down. Standard routine: restock supplies, mop floors, empty trash. Nothing in the rules about the upper floors, and so far I'd never encountered anything strange above ground level. The third-floor hallway was lined with those old-fashioned sconces that cast warm yellow light on burgundy carpet. As I wheeled my cart toward the elevator, I noticed one of the bulbs flickering in room 347. Not electrical malfunction flickering. More like someone was playing with a light switch. I made a note to tell maintenance, but the flickering stopped as soon as I passed the door. Back in the lobby by 12:45, I started my usual routine with the marble floors. The rules specifically mentioned what to do if the reflection showed something wrong, but I'd convinced myself that was just elaborate storytelling to mess with new employees. I filled my mop bucket with warm water and pine cleaner, the same industrial stuff we'd used at my old HVAC job. The smell always reminded me of high school, mopping the gym after basketball games to earn extra money. The lobby's marble stretched from the front entrance to the concierge desk, broken up by islands of burgundy carpet around seating areas. During the day, sunlight from the tall windows made the stone glow like honey. At night, the chandeliers turned it into a black mirror. I started near the entrance, working in broad strokes across the stone. The reflection showed exactly what I expected. Overhead lights, empty chairs, the night auditor's desk in the distance. Normal. Boring. 20 minutes in, I was working near the center of the lobby when Kevin called out from behind the desk. "Caleb, phone's been ringing weird all night. You know anything about that?" "What kind of weird?" I called back, not looking up from my mop. "Rings 4 times, stops, then starts again 10 minutes later. Same pattern." I remembered Rule 7 and felt my stomach drop. "How many times has it done that?" "Maybe 6. 7? Kevin shrugged. "I keep missing it." As if summoned by our conversation, the phone started ringing. 1 ring, 2, 3, 4. It stopped. I abandoned my mop and jogged over to the desk. Next time it rings, don't answer it. Let me handle it. Kevin looked confused but nodded. Sure, man. Whatever. We waited. Kevin went back to his book, something by Stephen King with a creased cover. I pretended to organize cleaning supplies while watching the phone like it might explode. 8 minutes later, it started again. 1 ring. I reached for the handset. 2 rings. Kevin looked up from his book. 3 rings. I lifted the receiver but didn't speak. 4 rings, cut off as I connected the call. Silence on the other end. Not dead air. The kind of silence that feels occupied. Like someone breathing very quietly. Yes, I said, remembering the rule about only giving yes or no answers. More silence. Then, faintly, a voice that sounded like it was speaking through water. Are you alone down there? The question felt loaded with meaning I couldn't grasp. I thought about Kevin reading behind the desk, about the empty lobby, about whatever might be moving through the halls above us. No. A pause, then, good. Stay that way until sunrise. The line went dead. I hung up and realized my hands were shaking. Kevin was staring at me. What was that about? He asked. Probably a prank call, I said, but my voice sounded thin. I walked back to my mop, which was sitting in a puddle of rapidly cooling pine water. As I bent to pick it up, I glanced down at the marble floor. The reflection was wrong. Instead of the lobby's burgundy carpet and modern furniture, the floor showed a ballroom from another era. Crystal chandeliers hung where our modern fixtures should be. Round tables covered in white cloth filled the space, and people in 1930s formal wear moved between them. I could see women in beaded dresses and men in tailcoats, all slightly translucent, like old film projected onto the stone. They were dancing to music I couldn't hear, laughing at conversations I couldn't catch. And in the center of the dance floor, looking directly up at me through the marble, was the woman in the feathered hat. She wasn't dancing. She was standing perfectly still while couples moved around her, and her eyes were locked on mine. Slowly, deliberately, she raised one gloved hand and pressed it against the underside of the reflection like she was touching glass from below. That's when I remembered Rule 8. Immediately retreat to the staff break room and wait until sunrise. I dropped my mop, again, and backed away from the reflection. The woman's expression didn't change, but I swear I saw her lips move, forming words I couldn't hear. "Kevin," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to take a break. If anyone asks, I'm in the staff room." "You okay, man? You look like you've seen it." "I'm fine," I interrupted. "Just need some air." The staff break room was down a short hallway behind the concierge desk, windowless and cramped, but blessedly normal. I sat in one of the plastic chairs and pulled out my phone to check the time. "Ig but got a supper a minute." Sunrise was still 5 hours away. I stayed in that room until 6:30, drinking vending machine coffee and trying not to think about the woman in the reflection. When I finally emerged, the lobby was empty and normal. The marble floors showed nothing but overhead lights and empty chairs. My abandoned mop and bucket sat exactly where I'd left them, but the water had dried into strange patterns that looked almost like footprints, the kind that might be left by someone wearing 1930s dance shoes. Kevin had left a note saying the phone never rang again after our conversation. I finished my shift in a daze, mopping around the dried water patterns and trying to convince myself that stress and exhaustion could cause hallucinations. But when I signed out at 7 a.m., I noticed something that made my stomach clench. In the guest registry, someone had signed in during the night. Catherine Holloway, room 824. The same room that was permanently out of order. The same name Jessa had mentioned. The woman who died in front of the lobby mirrors in 1932. Kevin was long gone, and the day shift manager wasn't in yet. I stared at the signature, written in old-fashioned script with fountain pen ink, and realized that following the rules might keep me safe. But it wouldn't keep me sane. The next evening, I arrived early to find Jessa still in her office, papers spread across her desk like she was preparing for battle. She looked up when I knocked on her doorframe. "How did last night go?" she asked, studying my face carefully. I thought about lying, but something in her expression told me she already knew. I saw her, Catherine Holloway, in the lobby floor reflection. Jessa nodded like this was exactly what she'd expected. "And you followed Rule 8? "Stayed in the break room until sunrise." I pulled out the guest registry printout I'd made before leaving that morning, but she signed in. Room 824. Jess's face went pale. She took the paper and examined the signature, then opened one of her desk drawers and pulled out a plastic sleeve containing what looked like a hotel registration card from the 1930s. The handwriting was identical. "This is her original check-in," Jessa said quietly. "November 15th, 1932. She stayed 3 days. How is that possible?" "The Arlington has been many things over the years," she said, locking the drawer. "During Prohibition, the basement connected to tunnels that ran under Central Avenue. Guests could access speakeasies without being seen. After the crash of 29, it became a refuge for people with nowhere else to go. Some of them never really left." She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the hotel's back parking lot. "The rules aren't arbitrary, Caleb. They're boundaries. Ways to coexist with what remains here. But when those boundaries get tested, what happens? Depends on who's doing the testing and what they want." I signed in for my shift with Catherine Holloway's signature fresh in my mind. Kevin was working another overnight, and he looked relieved to see me. "Dude, I was hoping you'd be here," he said as I approached the desk. Weird stuff started happening around dinner time. "What kind of weird?" He pointed toward the elevator bank. "Third car's been acting up. Keeps stopping on floors that don't exist. Maintenance checked it twice, but the computer shows it going to sub-basement levels we don't have." I thought about Rule 5 and felt my pulse quicken. "Anyone try to ride it?" Day shift supervisor went up around 6, came back white as a sheet, and told everyone to use the stairs. Kevin lowered his voice. "He wouldn't say what he saw, but he's been chain smoking in the parking lot for the last hour." At 11:30, Kevin settled in with a different paperback, something about vampires this time, and I started my rounds. I decided to tackle the upper floors first, hoping to avoid the lobby until absolutely necessary. The 8th floor was my usual starting point, but as I stepped off the elevator, something felt different. The hallway seemed longer than usual, stretching further into shadows that the wall sconces couldn't quite reach. Room 824 was at the far end, marked with a small, out-of-order placard that looked older than the hotel itself. As I worked my way down the hall with my cleaning cart, I kept glancing toward that door. No light leaked from underneath it, but I could swear I heard movement inside. Soft footsteps, like someone pacing on carpet. I was restocking towels in the housekeeping closet when I heard it. Piano music drifting up from somewhere below. Not the canned jazz they sometimes played in the lobby during the day, but something classical and melancholy, played by human hands on real keys. Rule 2. If you hear piano music from the ballroom between midnight and 3 a.m., do not investigate. I checked my watch. 12:47 a.m. The music continued as I finished the 8th floor, a waltz that seemed to echo through the walls themselves. When I reached the elevator, I hesitated. The middle car's display showed it was stopped on B2, a floor that didn't exist according to the hotel's directory. I pressed the call button for the left elevator instead. The doors opened immediately, and I stepped inside with my cart. As the doors closed, I heard the piano music more clearly, definitely coming from below, definitely live. Someone was down there playing, and part of me desperately wanted to know who. I pressed the button for the 7th floor and tried not to think about it. Working down through the building, I encountered my first guests of the night on the 5th floor. A couple in their 60s was standing by the ice machine, the woman in a hotel bathrobe, and the man wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt that read, Graceland, normal, contemporary, safe. "Excuse me," the woman said as I passed. "Have you been hearing music tonight? Piano music?" "Ma'am?" "It's been going for about an hour," her husband added. "Beautiful playing, but it's keeping us awake. We called the front desk, but they said there's no entertainment scheduled tonight." I thought about Rule 2 again. Don't investigate. But it didn't say anything about lying to guests. "I'll look into it," I told them. "Might be a radio left on somewhere." They thanked me and headed back to their room. As soon as their door closed, I pulled out my phone and texted Kevin. "Any other guest complaints about piano music?" His response came immediately. "3 calls so far." Told them we'd handle it. "You hearing it too?" "Yeah, don't go looking for it. Wasn't planning on it." By 2 a.m., I'd finished the upper floors and couldn't avoid the lobby any longer. The piano music had stopped around 1:30, but its absence felt more ominous than the sound itself. The lobby was empty except for Kevin, who was now reading the magazine instead of his book. "Caleb," he called as I approached, "that elevator's still acting up. Maintenance wants someone to check the basement storage before they call a service tech." I thought about Rule 1. Never work alone in the basement after 2:30 a.m. "What time is it?" I asked, though I already knew. 2:15. "Want me to come with you?" I almost said yes, but Kevin wasn't part of this. He didn't know about the rules, and I wasn't sure how the hotel's residents would react to an uninformed witness. "Nah, I've got it. Probably just a stuck relay or something." The basement access was through a service corridor behind the kitchen. I'd been down there a few times during day shifts to retrieve supplies. It was a normal hotel basement with concrete floors, storage rooms full of linens and furniture, and the kind of industrial equipment that keeps a building running. At 2:15 a.m., it felt like a different place entirely. The stairwell was darker than usual, and my footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was bouncing off surfaces that weren't there. The basement hallway stretched out ahead of me, lit by bare bulbs that seemed dimmer than I remembered. I found the storage room that housed the elevator equipment and pushed open the heavy door. Inside were the usual motor assemblies and control panels, but something was wrong with the main display. Instead of showing 3 elevator cars on floors 1 through 8, it displayed 5 cars, with 2 of them stopped on basement levels marked B2 and B3. I photographed the display with my phone, then checked the individual car controls. The middle elevator, the one that had been malfunctioning, showed active calls for floors that shouldn't exist. As I watched, a new call appeared. B4. The basement only had 1 level. I was studying the control panel when I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Slow, measured steps on concrete, moving toward the storage room. I checked my watch. 2:31 a.m., Rule 1. Never work alone in the basement after 2:30 a.m. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I turned off the room's light and waited, trying to control my breathing. Through the gap under the door, I could see the hallway lights were still on, but no shadows passed by. The footsteps resumed, moving away from my hiding spot, but they sounded different now, like they were wearing different shoes, hard-soled dress shoes instead of work boots. I waited 5 more minutes before cracking the door open. The hallway was empty, but the air smelled different. Instead of the usual basement mixture of concrete dust and cleaning supplies, there was a faint trace of cigarette smoke and something floral, perfume or hair oil from another era. I grabbed my phone and headed for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Behind me, I heard the elevator ding and the sound of doors opening, but I didn't look back. When I reached the lobby, Kevin was gone from the front desk. A note in his handwriting read, "Bathroom break. Back in 5 inches." I looked at the elevator display panel near the front desk. All 3 cars showed normal positions on floors 1 through 8. No phantom basement levels, no mysterious calls. But when I checked my phone, the photograph I'd taken showed exactly what I'd seen. 5 elevators. 2 of them servicing floors that officially didn't exist. Kevin returned a few minutes later, looking slightly shaken. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just weird night, you know. Could have sworn I heard someone walking around upstairs while you were in the basement. But when I checked, all the halls were empty." I nodded and went back to my cleaning, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel was becoming more active. The residents, whatever they were, seemed to be testing boundaries of their own. And I was starting to wonder what would happen when those boundaries finally broke down completely. The following night, I arrived to find chaos in the lobby. 3 Hot Springs police officers were standing near the elevator bank, talking in low voices with a detective I recognized from local news coverage. Day shift manager Patricia Vance was pacing by the front desk, gesturing with the kind of animated frustration that comes from dealing with questions she couldn't answer. "What's going on?" I asked Miranda as she gathered her things to leave. "Guest complaint turned into a wellness check," she said quietly. "Room 824. Woman called the front desk around 5 this afternoon, screaming about someone pounding on her door and crying. When Patricia went up to investigate, the hallway was empty." My stomach dropped. Someone staying in 824. "Computer glitch yesterday. System allowed a booking even though the room's supposed to be blocked." Miranda lowered her voice further. "Guest's name is Rebecca Chen. She's been up there for 2 nights and she's not doing well." I watched the police officers file toward the elevator. One of them carried a small tool kit, probably for picking locks. "They're going to open the room?" I asked. "Guest won't answer her door, won't answer her phone. Hotel policy requires a wellness check if we can't confirm guest safety." Miranda slung her purse over her shoulder. "Good luck tonight, Caleb. This place feels different when the cops are here." She wasn't wrong. The lobby buzzed with an energy that had nothing to do with the small crowd of officers and hotel staff. It felt like the building itself was agitated, like we'd disturbed something that preferred to remain hidden. I signed in and found Kevin already at his post, but he was watching the elevator display instead of reading. The middle car was stopped on the 8th floor. "They've been up there 20 minutes, he said when I approached. "Haven't come back down." As if summoned by his words, the elevator dinged and the doors opened. The detective emerged alone, talking rapidly into his radio. Behind him came 2 officers escorting a woman in her 30s, Asian American, wearing hotel slippers and a bathrobe over street clothes. She looked exhausted and kept glancing over her shoulder toward the elevator. "Ma'am, you're going to be fine," one of the officers was saying. "We're taking you to Baptist Health for observation. just as a precaution. The woman, Rebecca Chin, presumably, stopped walking and turned to face the lobby. Her eyes found mine across the room. "You work here," she said, pulling away from the officers. "You have to tell them. There's someone in that room, someone who doesn't belong there." Detective Morrison approached her gently. "Ms. Chen, we searched the entire room. There's no one else there." "Not in the room," she said, her voice rising. "In the walls, behind the mirrors. She keeps knocking, and when I knocked back, she answered. She knows my name." The detective exchanged glances with Patricia, who was wringing her hands by the front desk. "Ma'am, you've been under a lot of stress," he said. "The hospital staff will help you get some rest." As they escorted Rebecca toward the front entrance, she called back to me. "Don't let anyone else stay in that room, please. She's lonely, and she's getting stronger." After they left, Patricia spent 20 minutes on the phone with the hotel's corporate office, explaining why room 824 needed to remain permanently blocked in the computer system. The lobby slowly returned to its usual nighttime quiet, but I couldn't shake Rebecca's words. "She's getting stronger." Kevin was unusually chatty as I started my rounds, probably rattled by the police presence. "Weird how some people react to old buildings," he said. "My grandmother used to claim her house was haunted. Turned out she had a carbon monoxide leak." "Yeah," I agreed, though I knew what Rebecca had experienced wasn't caused by gas leaks. I started on the second floor, working my way up. The 8th floor felt different when I reached it around midnight. Heavier somehow, like the air pressure had changed. Room 824's door looked the same as always, marked with its small, out-of-order sign, but I could hear something on the other side. Not pounding or crying like Rebecca had described. Quiet shuffling, like someone rearranging furniture. I moved past quickly and finished the floor, but as I waited for the elevator, the sounds from 824 grew louder. Definitely movement now, and what sounded like drawers opening and closing. The elevator arrived, the left car, thankfully, and I stepped inside with my cleaning cart. As the doors closed, I heard a new sound from down the hall. 3 sharp knocks, repeated twice. Knock, knock, knock. Pause, knock, knock, knock. The same pattern Rebecca had mentioned. On the 7th floor, I encountered my first guest of the night. A man in his 50s stood by the vending machines, feeding quarters into the slot. He wore khakis and a polo shirt. Normal hotel guest attire. "Evening," I said as I passed. He looked up and smiled, but something about his expression seemed off. Too polite, too formal. "Good evening," he replied, and his accent was faintly southern but old-fashioned, like he'd learned to speak in a different era. "Lovely hotel you have here. Reminds me of the old days." I nodded and continued down the hall, but as I reached the housekeeping closet, I realized what was bothering me. The vending machines had been broken for 3 days. Maintenance had put out-of-order signs on both of them yesterday morning. I turned back, but the hallway was empty. No guest, no sound of footsteps, no indication anyone had been there at all. Rule 6. Between 3 and 4 a.m., you may encounter guests in period clothing from the 1930s. I checked my watch. 12:43 a.m. Either the rules were changing, or the hotel's residents were becoming more active outside their usual hours. I finished the upper floors without further incident, but as I reached the lobby around 2 a.m., Kevin called me over to the front desk. "That middle elevator's acting up again," he said. "Been stopping on phantom floors for the last hour. Want me to call maintenance?" "Not until morning," I said quickly. "Night service calls cost extra." What I didn't tell him was that I'd started to suspect the elevator wasn't malfunctioning. It was working exactly as intended, just serving areas of the hotel that existed in a different time. I started mopping the lobby floors around 2:30, working carefully around the seating areas. The marble reflected overhead lights and empty furniture, exactly as it should. Normal. Safe. I was finishing the area near the front entrance when I heard the elevator ding behind me. Footsteps emerged, moving across the lobby carpet. I didn't look up from my mopping, but I could see the reflection approaching in the wet marble. It was a woman in a 1930s dress, dark blue with small buttons up the front. Her hair was styled in finger waves, and she carried a small beaded purse. She walked with purpose toward the front desk, her heels clicking on the marble. Rule 6: acknowledge politely, but don't engage in conversation. "Good evening," I said, still focused on my mop. "Good evening," she replied, her voice carrying the same formal accent I'd heard from the man upstairs. "Busy night?" I almost responded, then caught myself. No conversation, just acknowledgement. She waited a moment, then continued toward the front desk. I watched her reflection as she approached Kevin, who was absorbed in his book and completely unaware of her presence. She stood directly in front of the desk for several minutes, as if waiting to be helped. Kevin never looked up, never showed any sign that he could see her. Finally, she turned and walked back toward the elevators. As she passed my work area, she spoke again. "Room 824 is lovely this time of year. Catherine enjoys the company." Before I could respond, not that I should have, she was gone, not faded away or dissolved, just absent, like she'd stepped into a different dimension that occupied the same space. I finished mopping in silence, thinking about Rebecca Chim's frightened face and her insistence that someone in the walls was getting stronger. When I looked at the guest registry later that night, there was a new entry written in fountain pen ink. Margaret Whitmore, room 824, visiting an old friend. Room 824, which was supposed to be permanently out of order. Room 824, where Rebecca Chen had heard knocking from inside the walls. Room 824, where Catherine Holloway was apparently entertaining visitors. The next evening brought thunderstorms that rattled the Arlington's old windows and sent guests scurrying through the lobby with wet umbrellas and complaints about the weather. I arrived to find Ashley, the new day shift girl, training behind the front desk while Miranda handled a line of irritated travelers whose flights had been delayed. "Caleb!" Ashley waved me over as I signed in. "Can you believe this storm? The power flickered twice already, and we've had 3 guest complaints about weird noises in the walls." My attention sharpened. "What kind of noises?" "Knocking mostly. Always in 3s. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Miranda thinks it's the old plumbing, but I've never heard pipes that sound so rhythmic." 3 knocks. The same pattern Rebecca Chen had described. The same pattern I'd heard from room 824. Miranda finished with the guests and approached us, looking frazzled. "Caleb, before you start your shift, can you check the 8th floor? We've had multiple complaints about disturbances, and maintenance is swamped with storm-related issues." "What kind of disturbances?" Guests in 823 and 825 both called about someone moving a furniture in the room between them. Problem is, 824 is empty and sealed. She handed me a key card. "Corporate wants us to document whatever's making the noise, but..." She glanced around to make sure no guests were listening. "Don't go in alone, okay? Wait until Kevin can go with you." I took the key card, feeling its plastic weight against my palm. Rule 3. Room 824 is permanently out of order. Do not enter, even if guests complain about noises. But this was a direct order from management, backed by corporate. The rules suddenly felt less like protection and more like obstacles to doing my actual job. By 11 p.m., the storm had settled into steady rain against the windows, and the lobby was finally quiet. Kevin was working his usual shift, but he seemed nervous, jumping at every sound of thunder and glancing frequently toward the elevator bank. "You okay?" I asked as I prepared to start my rounds. "Weird night," he said, tapping his pen against the desk. "That middle elevator's been running constantly, but no one's calling it. Goes up, comes down, stops on different floors. Started around dinner time." I thought about Margaret Whitmore and her evening visit to room 824. "Any guest complaints?" "2 people asked if we were moving furniture after hours. I told them it was maintenance, but..." He shrugged. "Maintenance left at 6. I started my rounds on the 2nd floor, working systematically upward. The building felt different during the storm, more alive somehow, like the rain and wind were feeding energy into its old bones. Sounds echoed strangely in the hallways, and twice I caught movement in my peripheral vision that turned out to be nothing when I looked directly. On the 5th floor, I encountered the guest in khakis again. He was standing by the same broken vending machines, but this time he was just staring at them, not attempting to buy anything. "Evening," I said, remembering Rule 6 about acknowledging but not engaging. He turned toward me, and I noticed his clothes looked different than they had the night before. Still khakis and a polo shirt, but the style was subtly wrong. The cut too high-waisted, the collar too narrow. Like a modern outfit designed by someone who'd only seen photographs of contemporary clothing. "Lovely weather we're having," he said, gesturing toward the window where rain streaked the glass. I nodded and continued past him, but his choice of words stuck with me. No one calls a thunderstorm lovely weather, unless you were someone who remembered when storms meant something different, when people gathered on hotel porches to watch lightning over the mountains, when electricity was newer and more remarkable. On the 7th floor, I found another guest, a woman in her 40s wearing a business suit that looked expensive, but somehow outdated. She was standing in front of the elevator bank, pressing the call button repeatedly. "Excuse me," she said as I approached. "Is there something wrong with these elevators? I've been waiting for 20 minutes. I looked at the display panel. All 3 cars showed they were stopped on the 8th floor. "I'll check on that for you," I said, pulling out my phone to text Kevin. But before I could type anything, all 3 elevators dinged simultaneously, and their doors opened. The left and right cars were empty, showing normal 8th floor hallways. The middle car revealed something else entirely. Instead of the burgundy carpet and cream-colored walls I expected, I was looking at what appeared to be a hotel hallway from the 1930s. Dark wood paneling, different light fixtures, carpet with a geometric pattern I'd never seen in the Arlington. And standing in the hallway, just visible through the elevator doors, was Catherine Holloway. She wore the same feathered hat I'd seen in the lobby reflection and the same dark dress with pearl buttons. But now she was looking directly at me, and her expression wasn't sad or lonely. She looked determined. "8th floor," she said clearly, her voice carrying the same formal accent as the other period guests. "Room 824. The woman in the business suit stepped toward the middle elevator. "Finally. Thank you." I grabbed her arm without thinking. "Not that one. Use the left elevator." She looked at me strangely, but stepped into the left car instead. The doors closed, and she was gone. The middle elevator doors stayed open. Catherine Holloway continued to stare at me from her impossible hallway. "We need to talk," she said. "Rule 8. If you see a woman in a feathered hat near the lobby mirrors, immediately retreat to the staff break room and wait until sunrise. But this wasn't the lobby, and she wasn't near any mirrors. The rules hadn't anticipated this scenario. "I can't," I said. "I have work to do." "Your work is keeping us apart," she replied. "Margaret came to visit yesterday, but the barriers are weakening. Soon, others will follow." The elevator doors started to close, but they stopped and reopened as if someone had pressed the button. "Room 824, Catherine repeated. "Before the storm ends. Some conversations can't wait for morning." The doors closed with finality, and the middle elevator began moving, down according to the display, toward floors that shouldn't exist. I finished the 7th floor in a daze and took the left elevator to the 8th, my mind racing. The rules were supposed to protect me, but they assumed I could simply avoid confrontation. What happened when avoidance was no longer an option? The 8th floor hallway looked normal. Burgundy carpet, cream walls, the familiar sconces casting a warm light. Room 824's door stood closed at the far end, marked with its small, out-of-order sign. But as I approached with my cleaning cart, I could hear voices inside. 2 women talking in low tones, their words muffled by the door but their cadence clear. One voice was Catherine's. The other belonged to someone I didn't recognize. I was debating whether to investigate when my phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. "Guest in lobby asking about you. Says she needs to speak with maintenance urgently." I texted back, "On my way down." But as I turned toward the elevator, the voices in room 824 grew louder. I could make out words now. "Getting stronger every night. The barriers were never meant to be permanent. He doesn't understand what he's preventing." The conversation stopped abruptly, and the hallway fell silent. I pressed the elevator call button and waited, trying not to look back toward room 824. When the doors opened, I stepped inside quickly and selected the lobby level. As the elevator descended, I heard 3 sharp knocks echo through the shaft. Then 3 more. Then silence. The lobby was empty except for Kevin and a woman I'd never seen before. She was maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a cardigan and slacks that looked contemporary but somehow timeless. She could have been anyone's grandmother, except for her eyes. They held the same formal intensity I'd seen in the period guests. "You must be Caleb," she said as I approached. "I'm Dorothy Fletcher. I've been staying here for several days, and I need to discuss something important with you." Kevin looked between us uncertainly. "She's been waiting in the lobby for about an hour," he said. "Insisted on speaking with you specifically." I checked the guest registry quickly. No Dorothy Fletcher listed for any recent dates. "What can I help you with, ma'am?" I asked carefully. "It's about room 824, she said. "And about Catherine. She's trying to help, but the situation has become complicated." She gestured toward the seating area, away from the front desk. "May we speak privately?" Every instinct told me to refuse, to stick to my cleaning schedule and avoid whatever this conversation might lead to. But Dorothy Fletcher didn't feel threatening, the way some of the other period guests had. She felt like someone with information I needed. We sat in 2 chairs facing each other across a small table. Dorothy folded her hands in her lap and studied my face. "You've been following the rules," she said. "That's wise. They've kept you safe so far. But Catherine believes you're ready to understand more about why those rules exist." "I'm just here to clean the building," I said. "No," Dorothy replied gently. "You're here because the Arlington chose you. Buildings like this don't keep night staff by accident. They select people who can handle the responsibility." She leaned forward slightly. The rules aren't just about avoiding danger, Caleb. They're about maintaining balance between what was and what is, between the guests who never left and the ones who visit temporarily. I don't understand. Room 824 was Catherine's room when she died, but it was also Margaret Whitmore's room, and Eleanor Davidson's, and dozens of others over the years. Women who came here seeking something, healing, hope, escape, and found more than they bargained for. Dorothy's voice took on a storytelling cadence, like she'd explained this before. The Arlington sits on springs that were sacred long before the first hotel was built here. The water that drew people seeking healing also amplified their emotions, their needs, their desperate wishes. Some of those wishes were strong enough to outlast the people who made them. Are you telling me the hotel is actually haunted? I'm telling you it's a repository. A place where human longing crystallized into something more persistent than memory. She gestured toward the elevator bank. Catherine and the others aren't ghosts in the traditional sense. They're echoes of intention, sustained by the same energy that drew people to these springs for centuries. Thunder rumbled outside, and the lights flickered briefly. The storm is weakening the barriers between their time and ours, Dorothy continued. Catherine asked me to explain because she knows you're afraid of her. But she's not your enemy, Caleb. She's trying to prevent something much worse. What could be worse? Dorothy's expression grew serious. The guests from earlier periods aren't all as benevolent as Catherine. Some came here fleeing violence. Others brought their violence with them. The rules exist to keep those echoes contained, but if the barriers fail completely... She didn't finish the sentence, but I could imagine the implications. What does Catherine want from me? To show you the truth about room 824. To help you understand what you're really protecting. Dorothy stood up, smoothing her cardigan. The choice is yours, but she believes you'll make the right decision. She walked toward the front entrance, then paused and looked back. The storm will end before sunrise, she said. But the weakening it caused will persist. Whatever you decide, decide quickly. After she left, I sat in the lobby chair for a long time, staring at the elevator bank and thinking about echoes of intention. Kevin occasionally glanced over from his book, but he didn't ask questions. At 3:17 a.m., I made my decision. I walked to the front desk and borrowed the key card Miranda had given me earlier. "Where are you going?" Kevin asked. "Room 824, I said. "If you don't hear from me in 30 minutes, call the police." I rode the middle elevator to the 8th floor, and this time, it showed me exactly what I expected to see. The middle elevator opened onto the 8th floor exactly as it should have. Burgundy carpet, cream walls, familiar sconces. Nothing had changed from my earlier visit, except now I could hear voices more clearly from behind the door of room 824. 3 distinct female voices, talking over each other in urgent whispers. I caught fragments. Time is running short. And he needs to see. And before the others wake up. I walked down the hallway with Miranda's keycard clutched in my sweaty palm. The out-of-order sign hung crooked on the door handle, and I could see light leaking from underneath. Warm yellow light, like old incandescent bulbs, not the harsh fluorescence the hotel used everywhere else. I knocked softly, 3 times. The voices stopped immediately. "Catherine," I called. "Dorothy said you wanted to talk." The door opened before I could use the keycard. Catherine Holloway stood in the threshold, and for the first time I could see her clearly. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with dark hair finger-waved in the style of her era, and intelligent brown eyes that held decades of sadness. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. I know this violates your instructions." The room was not what I expected. Instead of a standard hotel layout with a queen bed and modern furniture, I stepped into what looked like a 1930s apartment. A sitting area with a velvet couch and wooden radio occupied the space where the bed should have been. Heavy curtains covered windows that faced the wrong direction. I could see Hot Springs' mountain lights through them, but from an angle that was topographically wrong for the 8th floor. 2 other women sat in chairs near a coffee table that held a tea service. Margaret Whitmore, who I recognized from the lobby encounter, was pouring from a china pot that steamed despite having no visible heat source. The third woman was younger, maybe 25, with auburn hair and a nurse's uniform from the 1940s. "This is Eleanor Davidson," Catherine said, gesturing toward the woman in uniform. "She came here in 1943, after her fiancé died at Normandy." Eleanor looked up from her teacup and nodded politely. "Caleb, we've heard so much about you." I stood in the doorway, afraid to step further into the room. "This isn't how room 824 should look." "It looks different for each of us," Margaret explained. "The space responds to what we need to find peace. For Catherine, it's her apartment from Little Rock, where she lived before her husband lost everything. For me, it's my childhood home in Memphis. For Eleanor, the hospital where I worked," Eleanor finished, "where I felt useful." Catherine closed the door behind me, and I heard the lock engage with a soft click. "Please sit. We don't have much time before the others realize the barriers are weakening." "What others?" The 3 women exchanged glances. Margaret set down her teacup with a delicate clink. "Not all of the Arlington's long-term residents were here for healing," Catherine said carefully. "Some came here to hide. From the law, from their victims, from the consequences of what they'd done." She walked to the window and looked out at the mountain lights. The sacred springs amplified everyone's intentions, the hopeful and the harmful alike. When the barriers between time periods weaken, as they have during this storm, those darker echoes become more active. Eleanor leaned forward in her chair. "There's a man named Harrison Blackwood who checked in during the winter of 1934. He was fleeing Little Rock after murdering 3 women. The police never caught him. He died here of a heart attack before they could arrest him." "And there's Victoria Crane," Margaret added. "She poisoned her husband in Fort Smith and came here to establish an alibi. Died of tuberculosis in room 847, but her echo has been growing stronger." "They're contained by the same rules that protect you," Catherine explained. "But if those rules break down completely, if the barriers between our time and yours collapse..." She turned back to face me. "They won't be content to remain echoes. They'll try to inhabit your world more fully, to finish what they started." I felt my legs go weak and sunk heavily on the velvet couch. How is any of this my responsibility? I just clean floors. "Because you can see us clearly," Eleanor said. "Most people catch glimpses, hear voices, feel cold spots. But you interact with us directly. That connection makes you a conduit, someone who can strengthen or weaken the barriers depending on your choices." Margaret stood and walked to an ornate mirror that hung where the bathroom door should have been. "The rules your manager gave you aren't arbitrary. They're a protection system developed over decades of trial and error. But they're also temporary measures." "What do you mean?" "Every time you follow a rule, you reinforce the barrier between periods," Catherine said. "But every time you break one, you weaken it. The system works as long as the night staff understands and complies. But if someone breaks too many rules, or breaks them at the wrong time, Like during a storm that's already weakening everything, Eleanor added. Catherine sat beside me on the couch, and I was surprised that she felt solid, warm, human. We've been trying to maintain balance for almost 90 years, keeping the harmful echoes contained while providing sanctuary for those who need it. But the system is failing. Rebecca Chen, I said suddenly. The guest who was staying here. What really happened to her? The three women exchanged another look. Victoria Crane has been testing the boundaries, Margaret said quietly. She's learned to project her influence into the physical world for short periods. She was trying to possess Rebecca, to use her body to leave the hotel. We stopped her, Eleanor said, but barely, and the effort weakened us considerably. Catherine took my hand, and her touch felt like cold water. That's why we need your help. The barriers are failing, and we can't maintain them alone anymore. What exactly are you asking me to do? There's a way to strengthen the barriers permanently, Catherine said. But it requires someone living, someone with a strong connection to both periods. Someone who can anchor the protection system in the present while honoring what happened in the past. She stood and walked to what looked like a writing desk that definitely hadn't been in the room when I'd cleaned it during day shifts. From the drawer, she pulled out a leather-bound journal. This belonged to the hotel's first-night manager, Thomas Caldwell. He figured out how the spring energy worked, how to channel it constructively. His notes explained the process. Eleanor stood as well, smoothing her nurse's uniform. But there's a cost, Caleb. The person who performs the anchoring ritual becomes permanently connected to the hotel. They can never leave Hot Springs, never work anywhere else. The Arlington becomes their life. What's the alternative? The barriers collapse completely, Margaret said. Harrison Blackwood and Victoria Crane and others like them break free into your world. They'll be weak at first, but they'll grow stronger by feeding on violence and fear. Catherine handed me the journal. It was thick with handwritten pages, some in ink, others in pencil, dating from the 1920s through the 1950s. The ritual must be performed before sunrise, she said, during the hour when both periods overlap most strongly. But Caleb, once you begin, there's no turning back. I opened the journal to a page marked with a rhythm. The heading read, Permanent Barrier Establishment, Protocol for Emergency Situations. Below it were detailed instructions written in careful script, including diagrams that looked like they belonged in an occult textbook. How do I know you're telling the truth? I asked. How do I know this isn't some elaborate way to trick me into, I don't know, joining you permanently? Eleanor smiled sadly. Because if we wanted to hurt you, we could have done it weeks ago. You've been alone with us multiple times, trusted us enough to enter this room. We're not your enemies. And because, Catherine added, you've already seen what happens when the violent ones break through. Rebecca Chen was just the beginning. As if summoned by her words, the room's lights flickered, and I heard something that made my blood turn to ice water. Heavy footsteps in the hallway outside, moving with predatory purpose. He's awake, Margaret whispered. Who's awake? Harrison Blackwood, Catherine said, moving quickly to the door. The storm has weakened his containment more than we realized. The footsteps stopped directly outside room 824. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed through the door. Then 3 more. Don't answer, Eleanor said urgently. Don't acknowledge him. But I could hear a man's voice now, muffled by the door but clearly audible. I know you're in there. All of you. The barriers are down, ladies. Time to finish our conversation. Catherine pressed her back against the door, as if her slight frame could keep it closed. "Caleb, you need to decide, now, before he finds a way in." The journal felt heavy in my hands, its pages filled with ritual instructions I didn't fully understand. Outside the door, Harrison Blackwood began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass. "5 minutes," Catherine said. "That's all the time we have before the anchoring opportunity passes. Either you perform the ritual and save everyone, or we let the barriers collapse and hope for the best." The laughter stopped abruptly, and the hallway fell silent. Then I heard the elevator ding and new voices in the corridor. More of them, awakened by the storm and drawn by the weakening barriers. I looked at Catherine's desperate face, at Margaret and Eleanor standing together by the impossible window, at the journal that promised salvation at the cost of my freedom. And I made my choice. I opened Thomas Caldwell's journal to the marked page and began reading, while the hallway filled with voices, some pleading, others threatening, all growing louder as more spirits awakened. The spring energy beneath the Arlington Hotel can be focused through ritual sacrifice of personal freedom. I read aloud. The anchor must willingly surrender their ability to leave the grounds, binding their life force to the protection matrix. "Caleb," Catherine said urgently, still pressed against the door. "You need to start now." According to this, I need to be in the basement during the ritual. Something about proximity to the spring source. Eleanor moved away from the window. "We can protect you long enough to get downstairs, but once you begin, you'll be vulnerable until the binding completes." A new voice joined the chorus outside, female, sickeningly sweet. "Catherine, darling, why don't you introduce us to your new friend? Victoria's been so lonely." Margaret paled. "Victoria Crane. She's broken through." The door handle turned slowly, testing the lock. Catherine backed away as the metal began to bend under pressure that shouldn't have been possible. "Basement," I said, clutching the journal. "Now." Catherine grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the back wall of the room. Instead of solid plaster, my palm passed through what felt like cold water. She stepped forward, and I followed, trusting her completely. We emerged in a hotel corridor I'd never seen before. Older, with dark wood paneling and gas lamp fixtures that flickered with actual flames. Margaret and Eleanor materialized beside us, their period clothing making perfect sense in this environment. "Service stairs," Catherine said, leading us down a narrow staircase that spiraled deeper than the hotel's official basement. "This connects to the original spring chamber." Behind us, I heard the door to room 824 explode inward, followed by Harrison Blackwood's voice. "You can't hide from us forever, ladies. The barriers are crumbling." We descended through layers of Hot Springs history, past foundations from buildings that had stood here in the 1800s, through tunnels carved by Prohibition-era smugglers, down to chambers that predated European settlement entirely. The air grew warmer as we descended, thick with mineral vapor that made my skin tingle. Finally, we reached a natural cavern where steaming water bubbled up from pools carved directly into the rock. This was the source, the sacred spring that had drawn people here for centuries. "Here," Catherine said, pointing to a circular platform of smooth stone at the chamber's center. "Stand there and read the incantation." I stepped onto the platform and felt energy immediately surge through my feet. Not electricity, but something older and more primal. The journal's pages fluttered in my hands, though there was no wind underground. "The ritual requires 3 witnesses," Eleanor said, reading over my shoulder. 3 anchors from different time periods to stabilize the connection." "We're your witnesses," Margaret said. "But once you begin, we won't be able to protect you from the others." Above us, heavy footsteps echoed through the stairwell. They were coming. I found the incantation on the journal's final page. Words in English mixed with what looked like Cherokee phrases, probably copied from older sources that Thomas Caldwell had discovered. "Wait," I said. "What about Kevin? What happens to him when this goes wrong?" "He'll be safe," Catherine said. "The hotel will protect anyone under your care once you become its anchor." The footsteps were getting closer. Multiple sets now, moving with coordinated purpose. "Caleb," Eleanor said softly, "are you sure about this? Once the binding completes, you'll never leave Hot Springs, never have a normal life. The Arlington will be your world." I thought about my old life in Little Rock, the betrayal, the bankruptcy, the string of dead-end jobs that had led me here. Then I thought about Rebecca Chen's terrified face and Harrison Blackwood's predatory laughter. What happens if I say no? "Victoria and Harrison break free tonight," Margaret said. "They'll be weak at first, but they'll feed on violence until they're strong enough to leave Hot Springs. Eventually, they'll spread across the country. And you three? We'll fade," Catherine said simply. "Without the barriers, we can't maintain our presence here. The sanctuary we've built will die with us." Heavy breathing echoed from the stairwell. Close now. I began reading the incantation, stumbling over pronunciation but trusting the journal's phonetic guides. The spring water around the platform began to glow with soft phosphorescence, and I felt the stone platform vibrating beneath my feet. I, Caleb Whitfield, freely surrender my freedom to depart these grounds, I read. I bind my life to the protection of this place and accept responsibility for maintaining the barriers between what was and what is. The chamber filled with light that seemed to come from the water itself. Catherine, Margaret, and Eleanor stood at 3 points around the platform, their forms growing more solid as the ritual progressed. "I accept the wisdom of those who came before," I continued, "and pledge to guard against those who would use this sacred space for harm." That's when Harrison Blackwood reached the chamber. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark suit that might have been fashionable in 1934. But his face was wrong, features that shifted and blurred like reflection in disturbed water, and eyes that held depths of cruelty I'd never imagined. "Stop," he commanded, his voice carrying weight that made the cavern walls shudder. "You have no right to bind this place against us." Victoria Crane appeared beside him, a woman in her 40s with Marcel waved hair and a dress that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Her smile revealed teeth that were too sharp, and when she moved, the air around her rippled like heat mirage. "Such a young man," she purred. "So much life to waste on protecting these weak spirits." I pledged to serve as anchor and guardian. I read louder, fighting against a pressure that felt like deep water pressing on my eardrums. To maintain the balance between healing and harm. The light from the springs intensified, and I felt something fundamental changing in my chest, a sensation like roots growing through my ribcage, connecting me to the bedrock beneath Hot Springs. "You cannot complete this ritual," Harrison snarled, stepping toward the platform. "I forbid it." That's when Catherine moved. She stepped between Harrison and the platform, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked dangerous. The sad woman in the feathered hat was gone, replaced by someone who'd spent 90 years learning to fight for what mattered. "You have no authority here," she told him. "This space belongs to those who seek healing." Margaret and Eleanor flanked her, forming a barrier around the platform. Margaret's grandmother appearance fell away. revealing the steel that had helped her survive the depression. Eleanor's nurse uniform seemed to glow with its own light, and I remembered that she'd spent her living years tending wounded soldiers. "Until this binding is complete," I read, my voice growing stronger as energy flowed through me. "I accept guardianship of all souls who shelter here." Victoria Crane laughed, a sound like breaking china. "3 lonely women against the power of our hunger. You've grown weak in your sanctuary." She lunged toward Eleanor, hands that had held poison extended like claws. Eleanor caught her wrists and held firm, her nurse's training serving her well in this different kind of struggle. Harrison charged toward Catherine, but Margaret intercepted him, moving with surprising speed for someone who appeared to be in her 60s. "I seal this covenant with my own life," I shouted over the sounds of supernatural combat, "and accept the eternal responsibility it brings." The cavern exploded with light. When my vision cleared, Victoria and Harrison were gone, not destroyed, but contained, pushed back into whatever corner of the hotel's reality held them. Catherine, Margaret, and Eleanor stood around the platform, looking more solid than I'd ever seen them. And I felt different, connected, like I could sense every room in the hotel, every guest sleeping peacefully, every shadow moving through the halls. The Arlington had become part of me, and I was part of it. "It's done," Catherine said, and her voice carried both relief and sadness. "The barriers are permanent now. Victoria and Harrison are contained, and the sanctuary is secure." "How do you feel?" Eleanor asked. I tested the sensation of trying to imagine leaving Hot Springs, walking out the hotel's front entrance and driving away. The idea felt not just impossible, but fundamentally wrong, like trying to separate my head from my body. "Different," I said. "But not that different." Margaret smiled. "You'll find that your connection to the hotel brings certain advantages. Enhanced perception, the ability to communicate with all the residents, knowledge of threats before they become dangerous. And you'll never be alone," Catherine added. "The sanctuary is stronger now because of your sacrifice. We can help more people, protect them better." The journal in my hands crumbled to dust, its purpose fulfilled. Above us, I could sense Kevin at the front desk, safe and unaware of what had transpired. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Catherine said, "you go back to work. You have a hotel to maintain and guests to protect. But you'll never have to wonder if you're making a difference." As we climbed back toward the hotel proper, I realized that for the first time in months, I felt like I belonged somewhere, even if I could never leave. The morning after the ritual, I reported to work as usual. Kevin looked up from his book and waved, completely unaware that the person signing the overnight log was fundamentally different from the one who'd signed out 12 hours earlier. "Quiet night?" he asked. "Peaceful," I said, and meant it. Jessa arrived at her usual time, but she took one look at me and knew something had changed. During our morning briefing, she studied my face with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "The guest complaints stopped," she said finally. "No mysterious noises, no phone calls about piano music. Even the elevator's working normally. Maybe it just needed time to settle." She nodded, but her eyes held questions she wasn't ready to ask. Smart woman. Some answers required preparation. By the end of my first week as the hotel's anchor, I'd established new routines. The rules still existed, but they served a different purpose now. Guidance for temporary staff, rather than survival instructions for me. I could sense every corner of the building, every guest's emotional state, every echo that moved through the halls. Catherine, Margaret, and Eleanor had become my advisors and friends. They helped me understand the nuances of my new role, teaching me to distinguish between harmless spirits seeking comfort and the occasional malevolent presence that required containment. "There's a man in room 347, Catherine told me one evening as I began my rounds. "He's not dangerous, but he's deeply troubled. Lost his daughter in a car accident and came here hoping the springs might ease his grief." I found the guest sitting on his bed, staring out the window at the mountain lights. Without thinking, I knocked softly and entered when he answered. "Sir, I'm Caleb, night maintenance. Just wanted to check if you needed anything." He was maybe 50, with the hollow look of recent loss. "I'm fine, son. Just can't sleep." We talked for 20 minutes about his daughter, about Hot Springs' healing reputation, about the weight of carrying grief. When I left, he was lying down, breathing more easily than when I'd arrived. "How did you know what to say?" I asked Catherine later. "The hotel told you," she explained. "Part of being the anchor means understanding what people need. The springs amplify healing intention, just as they once amplified harmful desires. I learned that my connection to the Arlington extended beyond its walls. I could sense disturbances throughout Hot Springs that might threaten the balance we maintained. Twice in my first month, I helped local police locate missing persons who'd wandered into areas where the spiritual energy was unstable. They never asked how I knew where to look. My living situation changed gradually. The hotel provided me with the apartment on the 3rd floor, room 312, which had been mysteriously vacant for decades. When I moved in, I discovered it was larger than it should have been, according to the building's blueprints, with windows that looked out on Hot Springs from angles that defied architecture. "Every anchor gets a proper residence," Margaret explained. "The hotel adapts to provide what you need." My bank account received regular deposits that covered all my expenses, though I couldn't identify their source. When I asked Jessa about it, she just smiled and said corporate was pleased with my performance. Kevin left after a month, transferring to a day position at another hotel downtown. "Nothing personal," he told me during his final shift. "I just sleep better during the day now." His replacement was Ashley, promoted from her weekend day shifts. She adapted to the night schedule with surprising ease, and I suspected the hotel had influenced her selection. "This place feels different lately," she mentioned during her second week. "Calmer, like it's finally settled into itself." "Old buildings take time to find their rhythm," I told her. Sometimes, during the quiet hours before dawn, I walked through the lobby and watched the marble floors reflect our current reality. Modern furniture, contemporary guests, electric lighting that cast everything in steady illumination. No more glimpses of other eras bleeding through. The barriers held firm. Catherine occasionally joined me during these walks, appearing beside me like morning mist given form. "Any regrets?" she asked one night. I considered the question seriously. My old life felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else. The betrayal, the financial ruin, the desperate scrambling for purpose, all of it had led me here, to this strange sanctuary, where I could actually make a difference. "No," I said. "This feels right." She smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness I'd seen from her. Thomas Caldwell wrote in his journal that the hardest part of being an anchor wasn't the isolation. It was learning to trust that you'd made the right choice. Did he regret it? He maintained the barriers for 37 years. When he finally passed, he told the next anchor that protecting the sanctuary had been the most meaningful work of his life. I looked around the lobby, at the crystal chandeliers, the burgundy carpet, the marble floors that now reflected only what existed in the present moment. Upstairs, Guests slept peacefully, protected by barriers they'd never know existed. Throughout Hot Springs, the springs continued their ancient work of healing, no longer corrupted by malevolent intentions. "I can live with that," I said. As sunrise approached, Catherine faded like she always did, leaving me alone with my mop and bucket and the knowledge that I was exactly where I belonged. The Arlington Hotel had chosen well.